Hello. Hi, Ellie. Hi, our Limitless Minds family. How are you?
Hello, hello. Happy Tuesday. I am really, really good. I don't know about anybody else who is tuning on, but I really love the start of the week. And for me, it's been busy, but like all really good things and things that I'm grateful for. What about you?
The same. I have no complaints. Just I took a week off from everything. I erased social media from my phone, WhatsApp, emails, and then Ellie had to call me yesterday to ask if I was gonna be in the live today. So here I am, but I am grateful for kind of being able to take that time off and for the people in my life to understand that just that taking time off is okay.
I applaud you for that and don't mind having to give you a call a couple days before. For those of you who are tuning in, welcome to Limitless Live. Please type in the chat. Let's hear what you're grateful for today. We would love to hear it. And I will say, Tanya, that I think that one of the most difficult things, at least that I've encountered in speaking to other mental performance coaches, one of the most difficult things when it comes to practicing what we preach is probably the ability to like step away and set some of those boundaries and take time off. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the hardest things for me to actually do when it comes to practicing what I preach. So I massively applaud you for that. And I think that's fantastic.
And I'll add something. I know this is not exactly in the topic, but I think that's part of building relationships with your clients. Where I told all of my clients, I was like, I'm here. Like, if you really need me, then you can call me. You can, like, we'll find a way. We can use Telegram, which is an app that I don't have to erase for my phone because I don't check it very often. So it's not like my WhatsApp that's always on. Uh,
Mhm.
and I was I was like, if I told everyone around me, if no one's dying, don't contact me because I'm not going to answer. But I think part of doing it, which was really hard, and I'm working with another mental performance coach. We were supposed to do a big proposal for a team, and I was like, well, but on the plane, because I had told her, I'm like, I'm not going to be available. But then when I was on the plane, I was like, hey, do you want me to take some of these clients? And she was like, part of being in a partnership means that you can trust me to do the things. And so I had to, like, keep reminding myself whenever I wanted to text her to see how it was going. And I didn't. Um, but I think doing it also with the players that I work with teaches them that they can do that too. Like, it
Yeah.
gives people permission to say, I'm not going to be available unless someone's dying.
Mm. I think that's so good. I think that's so good, especially for demonstrating to players as well, because I know that that's also something that they can struggle with. Um, and recovery, something that we learn more and more, and I think it's actually becoming more widely acknowledged, is that recovery is just as important. So
Hmm.
yes, the grind and working hard is great and it's huge and we can see success, but also for us to be able to continue to move forward, we have to be able to take time away. We have to be able to relax, release, recover. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. Reason why we wanted to do gratitudes, everybody tuning in. One, because it's a great way to start intention and start the call off, focusing on the things that we do have. But I think for us, Tanya and I were chatting before this call, our focus today is on purpose and motivation. And I think that starting with gratitudes gives us a different perspective on that. It gives us the perspective of realizing how much we actually do have, how privileged we can be. And today we're going to talk about the what comes into play from the perspective of not having privilege and how that can impact motivation, not having access, not having some of the things that others have access to, and how that influences motivation. So it's a little bit different take today, which I'm actually really excited for.
Yes. I will say motivation is one of the topics that have interested me the most. I remember since I began studying psychology, my first like real research, like long ass paper was about motivation. And the more, what we want to talk about is kind of just debunking some of the myths and challenging some of the common assumptions that people have around motivation, and kind of understanding really what moves us. um,
Mhm.
I'm going to sound very geeky, but I remember one of the first things I learned is motivation comes from the word movere in Latin, which means to move.
Hmm.
And so motivation is, I think, the way I would define this, the thing that makes us move in life.
Hmm. The thing that makes us move in life. I'm writing that down right now. I need to save that. So, I think oftentimes when I think about motivation, or when I used to think about motivation, I was constantly thinking about what drives me externally. Actually, that's probably when I was young, I was
Mhm.
constantly thinking about the externals. And when I say externals, I'm talking about the achievements, I'm talking about the recognition, I'm talking about more of the things that are outside of myself. So, related to my experience, the people around me, and the environment. I think I was quite motivated by that. And as I got older, and I'm talking about more, I'm thinking about my experience in professional sports. So, when I was playing football or soccer, then as I got older, I started to realize that I needed to be more intrinsically motivated and be in touch with that part of me, because if I'm relying on external motivation, that can come and go. And sometimes that's influenced by things that are out of my control.
Mhm.
But then when I can be internally motivated, I can figure out, what success looks like for me in terms of the process, the hard work, the resilience, the character building, the perseverance, all of those different aspects. And when I can see progress in those areas as success, then I notice that my motivation, towards mastery, it it went a little bit quicker, and it was more sustainable,
Right.
and not the up and down. And so that was my experience from like a playing perspective. I'll pause there in case you have anything to say before I go forward.
I'll just say, it's complex because the intrinsic motivation also comes and goes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes it can even feel unattainable in a way. Like, we know there's studies that have shown that people who love doing an activity, as soon as they started getting money for it, they started enjoying it a little bit less. And so it is important. And one of the things that we want to talk about today is kind of that balance, right? Having how both the external and the internal are important, and how can we maximize kind of motivation within ourselves and the people around us, and as leaders with the people that we lead,
Mm-hmm.
by being aware of what are the different kinds of motivation, and how can we have kind of this combination of intrinsic and extrinsic. And that's also where purpose comes in.
Mm. Okay, so for those tuning in, this is the topic then. We're looking at maximizing motivation, both for ourselves and for our teams, especially if we're in a leadership position. But we are recognizing today that there's a balance to be had between internal and between external. So we're going to tap into both of those today, and how you
Mhm.
can do that.
Do we want to start by showing really quickly the picture? Mari, our producer, she's going
Yes.
to put it up on the screen. So just very briefly, this is like the original, or the Desi and Ryan were one of the first theories in motivation. This is from the self-determination theory. And kind of it shows that the green one is the intrinsic one, and then all of the other ones are extrinsic. And here's one of the first things that I want to challenge about it, and we'll get deeper into it. And one of the things, a couple of the things that weren't taken into account when this theory was developed, and I know it's studied everywhere, and when you talk about motivation, generally self-determination theory comes up,
Mhm.
is it didn't take into account a multicultural, multi-personal perspective. And so, for example, neurodiverse people were not taken into account. And me being one of them with ADHD, I can have I can be super intrinsically motivated about one thing one day and the next one completely not motivated at all. And that's kind of how my brain works and the dopamine. And so even if it's the same activity and even if it's something that I know I love, the motivation to do it isn't always there because my brain is always like playing off these highs and lows of dopamine. So that's one.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it happens in sports too, Ellie. The intrinsic one, we all assume that because you're doing what you love, then you're always going to like love doing it, but it's not actually true.
Mm. I think you're probably right. I would actually agree with you. And I think that if I'm thinking about this balance to be had, when I'm working with a team early on in the season, I'm trying to really tap into their intrinsic motivation by understanding their why, understanding their story, understanding their values. Um, because I think all of that can tap into why they do what they do and how they choose to show up daily.
Hmm.
And that's what I try and get them really focused on, like the process. How do we tie into the process? Because if we can do that, the outcome will take care of itself. And the outcome in this case is more related to the extrinsic motivation,
Yeah.
probably. And the reason why I try and tap into the intrinsic motivation so much is because I think the extrinsic is naturally there all the time. It's going to be there. So it's not that I'm not going to acknowledge it and not going to also try and tap into it, but I know that I don't need to spend as much effort there because for a lot of like players that I've worked with, the extrinsic is there. It's usually reinforced by statistics and outcomes and the scorecard, the scoreboard, the
Hmm.
league, whatever it might be. So I basically try and tap into intrinsic because I'm trying to get that balance, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it makes absolute sense. And that's where, um, again, like looking at it, the values and why you do it, they're all part of the extrinsic
Mm.
in this theory. They're all part of like, um, sorry, Mari, can you put the the picture up again? So integrated has to be with like this is part of who I am. You're doing something that maybe at the moment you're not finding that much enjoyment or satisfaction, but it takes you to be the person that you want to be.
Mm.
And then the identified has to do with what you said and its values. It's like what's important to you. So will it help me achieve my goals? And this is, I think, part of what you're saying is some of these are already present. um, and I think the value is in recognizing that they are present and how can we find ways to like use each one of them. And it's almost like the external ones have a bad rep. Like
Mm.
the very external one, the one that has to do with compliance and external rewards, they're like, well, it has to do with validation and what other people think of you and whether you win or lose. And I'm like, well, but that's important too. Like humans, from a behavioral standpoint, we move towards external rewards, and that's important too. Is if you're looking, for example, to take a job, you need to have all of this. Will they pay me well? That's external. It has to do with money and compensation. Does it go according to the lifestyle that I want to have? Then that's values. Then will it help me grow as a professional? That's the integrated. And then will I enjoy it? And so I think, especially for women, sometimes we disregard the last one, the external, because they're like, well, and mental performance coaches, and we know people in helping positions, they're like, well, all the other ones are there and we accept it, but then we get burnout because there
Mm.
is external reward because we're not maybe getting paid enough. And so that's why I think
Yeah.
super important to consider all of them
Mm.
and see how we can use them to potentialize
Yeah.
motivation.
So what I'm thinking of, I always want to like get out and draw things. I need to have a whiteboard behind me. I think Krista Ryan's good at that. She's always got one behind her. So I'm gonna pull out a piece of mail at the moment. So we've talked about this before on lives, and I think repetition is good. And there might be some people tuning in who haven't heard this, but Simon Sinek, he talks about this idea of the golden circle, and so it kind of looks like a target, and I'll draw it right now. If you can even read this. Can you read that?
Yep.
Is it backwards? That's fine.
But you can read it.
Okay, so in the middle, this is the why. You've got your second layer, which is the how, and then you've got your third layer, which is the what. And he says, oftentimes people are only tapping into the what. This is what I'm doing. And so sometimes when we encounter an obstacle or something comes in our way or our circumstances change, then it can be hard to understand what the what is, and that's when motivation can drop. So he says what's really important is that we tap into why we're doing what we're doing, because if we know why, that's going to drive the how and therefore going to drive the what. So if the what changes, the why as the core will continue to find a new what. And so for me, what I think about is the fact that like sometimes we need to be tapping into the what, because when we do, and even if like when we're setting goals, we set micro goals alongside that. And what that does is when we have small external achievements that we're trying to hit, when we're able to hit those, there's a reward response that happens in our brain that like we get excited, we release feel good hormones, and that motivates us to want to continue forward. So when we have those external rewards that we're hitting, especially the small ones that lead to the big ones, that's tied to the process, really. When we can do that, that keeps feeding that reward system that keeps us engaged. But when that day to day gets hard and sluggish and we don't really want to continue and we don't know why we're showing up and we're tired and we don't feel good, that's when we have to tap into the why. So each one of these areas is really important to be tapping into. The why, I think, as the center can drive the how and the what. And it might not always work the other way around, but sometimes we forget our why, or it feels like our why changes and we have to find a what temporarily. So we can always be tapping into each one of these. That's what it sounds like you're saying, or what it reminds me of.
And that's where purpose comes in, right? Because why is purpose? Is, what's behind what you're doing? What's the reason that's moving you? And so it's kind of when it doesn't feel good in the moment, but you're doing it for something that matters and that's going to move you. And going back to the example of me having fleeting moments of intrinsic motivation, it's like, well, but then I have my why, and that's what's going to help me do it even though I'm not enjoying it or I'm not feeling like it, because it's tied to maybe that why, or that like, well, it's part of my goals. I don't know, we've talked about this a lot, but speaking in public, I don't like it, but it's part of my profession. It's part of what we do at Limitless Minds. It's part of what we do as mental performance coaches. And so it's like putting yourself out there and kind of being mortified for a little bit, because it's part of my goal to be a great professional. And it's tied to purpose, because purpose is, why am I doing it, is because I want to move people.
I think that is something that I completely agree with what you're saying, and I feel the same way. Public speaking in some senses would be that for me, just depends on the environment. And the times when I've struggled the most with it, I think, is when I'm just getting so caught up in the what. And then I go back to the why. The why for me is the impact that I'm trying to make. And like, hey, if I speak and I connect with one person and that shifts something for them, that to me can be enough. And if I believe in that going into it, then I can get through it because it's beyond me. And so I think for leaders, this is where you can help maintain or increase or tap into motivation by understanding, hey, there are extrinsic rewards that I can be setting in place to try and encourage that, be that leaderboards, be that competitions
Yeah.
and targets and achievements and all different kinds of things, recognition.
Hmm.
That can be tapping into the extrinsic, especially for those who really are keen on those things. But then getting to know your team and actually why they show up, why they do what they do, because how you approach and connect with them is so different based on their why. Like for one person, it might be because of their circumstances and their family not being able to put food on the table, and for another person, they may be, just like really, really highly competitive, and they want to see what they can do in this career path and then take it to the next and take it to the next. And so they're like keen on the leaderboards while the other person wants job security and the benefits. So motivation and understanding your team's motivation is massively important, or understanding why is massively important to enhance their motivation.
Yeah, and you kind of gave us the entrance to for me kind of to also criticize a little bit of this model too, where again it was all about intrinsic motivation and enjoyment, and it's like, well, it's also not taking into account this multicultural thing where it's easier to enjoy something and to feel passionate and be interested in doing it when you don't have to worry about putting food on the table or making ends meet. And so the same activity for for even for the same person can feel very differently when your needs aren't met. Or the example I gave you is playing football. We all know most players love it. They started doing it because that's something that they enjoyed, but then that's something that gets socially reinforced, and that's where like the external motivation starts coming in, when parents and peers start kind of being like, oh, you're awesome at this.
Yeah.
But then it's not the same. Let's say a professional team, the player that just signed a 10-year contract versus the player that has their contract ending at the end of the season. And so even if they both enjoy playing soccer and might be intrinsically motivated, it's going to be easier for the person that has that 10-year contract to just focus on the intrinsic part of it rather than the extrinsic, because of that.
Mm. So in those cases, the circumstances can be entirely different if we're not sensitive to those and trying to understand those as a leader,
Mhm.
or amongst colleagues, friends, teammates, whoever they might be, then we can be completely missing the mark. And I think we have a duty, I don't it's a duty of care. It's we can help motivate someone, but purpose goes so much more beyond that. And I think we can have a duty of care by tapping into those to actually create the kind of environment where teams thrive. And I think that goes hand in hand with motivation, really.
Yeah. And also for ourselves. And this is, I think, where some of the concepts that we use at Limitless Minds are gold.
Yeah.
You might not notice that you're not enjoying the sport as much because you have all this pressure, because you have the contract coming up, or because you know that it may be the next big step for you. And so that's where, like, first you have to be aware of it, which is something that we talk about, is be here, like, know your feelings, understand that, yeah, you might have pressure, more pressure now, which is probably going to make it more stressful and maybe forget that to enjoy some things. uh,
Mhm.
that's where, again, getting to neutral and taking the next right step is what's going to help. And kind of just, I think that the more, at least for me, the more I use that in my life, the more it helps me to get back to maybe that intrinsic place. Um, but even if it doesn't, and I'm not enjoying it, and I'm like, well, I just have to do this because I have to do it. Being able to stay neutral allows you to continue to perform well, regardless of what are the motivations around what you're doing, if performing is what's going to make the difference
Mm.
in your life.
It's almost an understanding that there may be times where motivation and purpose might not feel present in that moment, given the day, given what we're going through. And that's where some of the tools that we talk about with Limitless Minds, the skill, because it's a skill, it's practice to being able to get to neutral, is what can get us through those moments as well. And then
Mm-hmm.
also keep us tethered to why when we're able to shift to neutral and then continue forward.
Yeah.
I think one thing that makes me think of, I know we're getting close on time, so we can start winding down with some tips, but really briefly, one thing that makes me think of is like when I retired out of playing. So when I decided to stop playing football, I think most people, when they retire out of sport or they're transitioning into a new career path, it's scary and it is challenging. And I think for me, it did help that prior to, I did a bit of soul searching and trying to understand who I actually was beyond the sport, like what my values were, why I did what I did. So, kind of tapping into my why, that middle of the golden circle. And so, for me, my why was about like, making an impact and helping others reach their full potential,
Mm-hmm.
and also getting to do that with myself, and that's what drove me towards success in my sport. But then as I started transitioning out of sport, I was able to tap into my why, which meant that even though my what was changing drastically, I had security in the fact that I felt like I was going to be okay because I knew that I could still make an impact. It would just look different. And I think that kept me so grounded from an identity standpoint. And that was a huge moment for me of like tapping into my why, got me through that. And I could have been in such a bad place. I could have been so lost, as I think many people are when they go through major changes.
I love that. Thanks for sharing it, because
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that is the scariest for athletes that are retiring, or is their the thing that was intrinsically motivated for them will be taken away. And so they feel that if that gets taken away, then everything else won't be there. And it sounds like by you being able to tap into some of those other things, you were able to find that there's intrinsic passion in other things, even though it's not, like you said, even though the what changes, but
Yeah,
the passion for what's really important to you stays there.
absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Before we hop off, because I know we're tight on time, if you briefly have a tip, tool, anything that you want to give to those tuning in when it comes to purpose and motivation.
Yes. So I will give one that, ironically, even though I've been talking about how the intrinsic one isn't the most important, but all of them, I do feel that enjoyment and finding kind of purpose, and not just enjoyment, enhances performance and also mental well-being. And so it's for yourself or for your team, write 5 ways in which you can make a meeting or a practice or whatever it is that you have to do more fun. So adding humor, adding some activities. So how can you make it more fun? How can you 5 ways to make it more engaging? And so that means having challenges, competition. And the third one is how can you make it more meaningful? And so I always like to give people like write 5, just write 5. With my clients, I'm kind of meaner and sometimes I make them write 10 or 20. It doesn't mean that you'll do all of them, not even the 5, but I think when you're forcing your brain to think of like, what are 5 ways I can do this more fun? What are 5 ways in which I can do this more challenging or engaging? What are 5 ways in which I can introduce like something of purpose and significance? Then both for yourself and for others, um, the intrinsic will go up a lot.
Okay, so that is the takeaway for those tuning in. 5 ways to make it more fun, 5 ways to make it more meaningful or more engaging, maybe make it more challenging. Uh, I'm definitely going to try that, and also maybe try that with some of the coaches that I work with. So that's going to be the takeaway for today: purpose and motivation. Hope everybody had some sticky stuff, maybe some new stuff that you've heard, maybe some repetition, which I think is always good. But for us, we thank everybody for tuning in. Tanya, I honestly love hanging out with you. It feels so natural and like we're just being ourselves. So this has been amazing.
Likewise.
And make sure, so next week we have a brand new guest on with DJ, Monica Livingston. So make sure you tune in because she is flipping cool and it's going to be fun to watch and learn from. So have an amazing week, everybody, and keep on keeping on.